today's consultation hour, the financial part is about contract articles and annexes, a deep dive into some details of your grant agreement. Deep dive is phrased generously because, as usual for our input, I will only get into this topic for about 10 minutes, so it's rather a quick overview. This will be kind of a mix between regulations that we get a lot of questions about, or that are very important, or that sometimes are forgotten because they are at the end of the contract. After my input, we will answer your questions and you can ask anything about the financial implementation. It does not have to be about contracts at all. And Benjamin and Sven will support me with answering all your questions, as I already told you, so feel free to ask anything. A little but important disclaimer beforehand. We have new contracts since October 2022. So all newer contracts have quite some different rules. Oh, sorry, can everyone mute themselves, please? So can you hear me again? Yes. Yeah, I see nodding. Perfect. Sorry about that. So little disclaimer, we have new contracts since October 2022. So all newer contracts have different rules than the older ones. Because of that, I will not get into articles or rules in this presentation that differ greatly between older and newer ones, but I will focus on rules that apply to all projects. You can still ask, of course, any question, even if it is specific to your contract version in the chat. But in that case, please add to your question either if you are a new project that started in the past few months or an older one, or just post with your EUKI signature, so that helps us answering all your questions correctly. Also, I use screenshots directly from the contracts in this presentation. So this also means that a specific rule or article might be phrased a little different in your version of the contract, but it still means the same. Okay, so let's dive in. Oh, and one more note. I posted the article number above all the articles. The first one applies to the newer contracts and the second one to the older ones. Let's start with the 20% rule. It's a very useful and often used rule that says that you can shift your funds between budget categories up to 20%. This is only applicable if you offset the same amount in other budget lines. But the shift is also only possible between the direct costs, so not for forwarding of funds or admin costs. Your partners can shift within their own budget in the same way, but it is not possible to shift funds between partners or as an implemented from the budget category forwarding of funds. So in any case, it is very important that you consult with your financial advisor before doing that so that there are no mistakes made with the shifting. We often get questions about own contributions, so I added this part as well on the cover note of the financial statement or financial report, as it's now called. You always have to indicate your own funds that were used for the respective period. You also have to properly document your own contribution in your own bookkeeping in the same standard that you document EUKI funds. So you can submit proof of using your own funds when requested, or that an auditor can see it as well. Please be aware that you always have to submit an inventory list as well with your report if this is applicable to your project. If you do not or are not able to contribute for some reason the amount of own funds that were agreed upon in the contract and budget, a GIZ has the right to reduce your grant by the same proportion. So if you notice that the contribution is not possible for some reason, get in touch with us rather sooner than later. Since we also get a lot of questions about the use of exchange rate with foreign currency, if you live in a country that has a different currency than euros, you have to use the exchange rate that is on your bank voucher on the day of the transmission of your received funds. And only in exceptional cases and with the consent from GIZ is it possible to use the converter info euro instead, instead of the rate of the bank transmission voucher. Now, some things about the work with your implementing partners. You were all told to do an appropriate due diligence for your partners to select it, because this is in fact also part of the contract. So please be aware that we might take a look on the due diligence that you did anytime. So make sure you documented everything properly. You also had to shortly explain in your project proposal how your project activities are not a violation of EU state aid law, but the same applies to your partners, of course, as well, because as you know from drafting your consortium agreements, all essential terms of your grant agreement with us also applies to your partners. Essential terms are, for example, also the rules regarding the reporting, procurement, or documentation standards. And you are generally responsible for the proper implementation of your partners, which means you should always check the financial reports from them before forwarding all the documents to us. This is an article that you are all aware of, but it is so important that I still want to include it. Please comply with the GIZ procurement guidelines in Annex 4A. This is very important, since when you are audited, the non-compliance with our procurement rules might lead to a very high financial finding, so ineligible costs. Speaking of audits, you can be selected to be audited anytime. When you are subjected to an audit, we will have a follow-up with you after the audit, where we will send you recommendations about the findings. Please just be cooperative with us in this process and implement these recommendations from us or from the auditor, of course. And please provide proof if we request it of that. Furthermore, you have to keep all documents regarding your project for 10 years after the submission of your last financial report. We know that this is a very long time, but most documentation should be or is probably digitally nowadays anyway, so this should be fine for everyone. In case there are significant changes to your project's risk assessment, for example, an arising impact on human rights, the environment, or risk to the safety or health of your staff, please contact us as soon as possible so we can decide together how to proceed. In the same way, if an unavoidable event happens, like a natural disaster, epidemic, or war, please contact us as soon as possible so we can also figure out that together as well. Articles like that always seem like they will never be used, or things like that will never happen. But now, looking back on a pandemic and a war happening very closely, you just never know. So just be aware that there are options for you in these scenarios. Also, we ensure that the adequate protection of your data. So please always apply your legislation about data protection, but at the minimum, the specifications that are listed in the data protection articles. For example, that employees should only have access to personal data that is absolutely necessary for the implementation. At the very end of your contract, all the applicable annexes are listed. At least for the NOAA contracts, all the annexes are listed there. Please be aware that there are components of the grant agreement. Beside the budget and the proposal that you have on hand, there are, for example, all our other templates listed as well that you can find here on our GIZ page. And always go to the drop-down menu that applies to you, and there you will find everything. The first step, if you have questions about anything regarding the financial implementation, should be a look into the financial guidelines, so Annex 3A, because there are a lot of information that are useful in there. I also highlighted the inventory list because it's sometimes forgotten, as well as the procurement guidelines and the documentation template for procurements.